Brad Graham, the co-owner of Politics and Prose, along with my wife, Lista Muscatine. And we have a very timely program for you today featuring Dan Morain and his new book about our soon-to-be Vice President, Kamala Harris. For those of you not familiar with how this virtual format works, although you're not visible to us, you'll still be able to ask a question if you'd like. To do so, just click on the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screens. The chat function also will be active, and in that column, you'll find a link for purchasing Dan's book, Kamala's Way. Dan has covered California policy, politics, and justice-related issues for more than 4 decades, including 27 years at the Los Angeles Times and 8 at the Sacramento Bee, where he rose to become editorial page editor. He got to know Kamala Harris when he was with the Bee, and his knowledge of California politics makes him especially well-positioned to write about her, because, as he notes early in the biography, it's impossible to understand her without understanding the complexities of the politics in the state, where she served as a local prosecutor, district attorney of San Francisco, attorney general, and U.S. senator. California has many often contradictory aspects, and Kamala Harris, as a politician, had to navigate among them. Her ascent, Dan writes, was due largely to her talent at doing just that. A review in Kirkus called Dan's book admiring yet balanced, and Politico deemed it an essential roadmap to understanding this daughter of Jamaican and Indian immigrants who's about to become our first woman, first African American, and first Asian American vice president. In conversation with Dan this evening will be another veteran journalist, Karen Tumulty, whose Washington Post columns are, I'm sure, familiar to many of you. In previous incarnations during her long career, Karen served as a national political correspondent for the Washington Post, and before that, she reported for Time Magazine and the Los Angeles Times. On behalf of Politics and Prose Live, I'd like to welcome Dan Morain and Karen Tumulty.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having us both.
Yes, thank you, Brad. And it's just delightful to be here with my former colleague from the Los Angeles Times, Dan Morain, and his terrific new book that we're going to discuss tonight. Dan, and as I was reading it, it occurred to me that the title is really interesting, Kamala's Way, because you're really exploring 2 things. In one way, it's the way in which she got here, specifically the way in which she got to the point where tomorrow at noon, she will be standing and taking the oath of office. But also it's about her way of doing business and sort of what we should, it's a primer to what really we should expect of a woman who, a lot of people are going to be looking at as a potential president in waiting. So I'd first like to ask you about her origin story. And specifically, let's start with her parents. I mean, the incredible influence of her mother, a brilliant research scientist, immigrant from India, and her father, an immigrant from Jamaica, an academic, but somebody from whom she has sort of a distant, it feels like even estranged relationship. Could you talk about both of them and their influences on her?
Well, I think her mother, who I never met, it strikes me as such an extraordinary character. Imagine a 19-year-old girl, really, in India. She's graduated from college in India. Her path to become a research scientist, which was her goal, her passion, was not open to her in India. And so she persuades her father to let her go halfway around the world. And so she shows up at Berkeley, University of California at Berkeley in 1959. This is a teenager who stands 5 foot tall, maybe a little bit taller. But just imagine the courage of this woman. She gets her PhD. She becomes a research scientist. She publishes or co-publishes in excess of 100 articles over the decades. Really an extraordinary, from what I gather, true force of nature. She meets her husband, Donald Harris, who is from Jamaica, and he too comes to University of California at Berkeley to study economics, and becomes obviously quite accomplished. He becomes a tenured professor at Stanford, no small feat. They split when Kamala Harris was 5 and divorced in 1972. It was final. They shared custody. He brought her to Jamaica, her and her sister Maya, and her mother brought her to India. So she had roots in both countries. It's just and growing up in Berkeley, I mean, being a toddler in Berkeley, being a young girl in Berkeley, you had to have been affected by it. I grew up across the bay in San Mateo, but I was certainly aware of what was going on. It was such a energetic part of the world, and you think about all the movements that were birthed there. The anti-war movement was certainly front and center. Anti-Vietnam War, the environmental movement, prisoners' rights. I mean, these are the sorts of issues that were front and center there. Great music came out of it, but it was just such a fascinating part of the world in a really fascinating period.
But there's a point at which her mother certainly introduces her to the culture and the food and everything about her own background in India. But at some point, she realizes that these two little girls, who are her daughters growing up in Berkeley, are going to be seen as Black Americans. So could you talk a little bit about that identity? You know, these two daughters whose the force in their life is an Indian American woman who tells them, you are going to be the first to do a lot of things and just make sure you are not the last. But how does she also sort of, you know, equip them for growing up Black in America?
Well, you're right. But go back to that statement. You may be the first, but make sure you're not the last. That's such an extraordinary and really prescient way of viewing the world, because Kamala Harris has been the first in so many different ways. First, when she runs for San Francisco District Attorney, she goes off to the San Francisco Public Library, which is a great public library, and copied photos of all the white men who had come before her and put them on a brochure juxtaposed against her. So she was different, clearly. But you're absolutely right. She is. She has been a trailblazer in so many ways. Her mom understood that in America she would be viewed as Black, and so she made sure that her kids had the knowledge of their background, who they were, where they came from. Of course, it was Jamaica, not the United States. The experience was not dissimilar. Jamaica had a terrible slave economy and in the 1700s and the 1800s, terrible. And so she understood that. She has become steeped in the civil rights movement. She's very well aware of the history in the United States that Black people went through, and so much of that, I believe, is attributable to her mom. So you're right.
And then she herself chooses to go to Howard University here in DC. Talk about that.
Well, you know, she truly is a multicultural person. When you think about, growing up in Berkeley, which is obviously a very different sort of place, cosmopolitan place. People from all corners of the world converge in Berkeley. But then her mother got passed over for promotion, evidently, and rather than sit around and brood, she applied for a job, got a job at McGill University up in Quebec. So from age 12 until she turns 18, she's in French-speaking Montreal. But yeah, she goes to Howard in Washington. It was clearly a conscious choice. She writes about it in her autobiography really fondly. She loves Howard, loved Howard, loved the sorority she is a member of. And that's really clearly very much a part of her identity. As it is for, I think, all Howard grads. I think it is an extraordinary experience that university provided to her and to others. And it was such an interesting time in the world. She talks about marching against apartheid while at Howard. When she was there, it was the first MLK Day, and Jesse Jackson came and spoke at Howard on that day. Shirley Chisholm was there, the first Black woman to run for president in the United States. So first Democrat. There was it was an extraordinary time, and she greatly appreciated it. I believe she's still great friends with many of her classmates.
But she returns to California for law school, and you write so much about the great social upheaval that has really been going on in California all around her throughout her childhood. But I think a lot of people who don't live in California don't understand that, politically speaking, it's two states. Northern California and Southern California are just completely different places. And could you talk a little bit about the sort of more bare knuckles style of politics that you see in San Francisco and Oakland, and some of the environment that she finds herself in as a young, smart, ambitious lawyer?
Yeah, well, it's really more than two states. There are multiple types, multiple Californias. There's the Kevin McCarthy California down in Bakersfield, which is a world apart from where she was, where Nancy Pelosi represents San Francisco. But San Francisco, it especially when she was running for district attorney at the end of 2003, she won in 2003, took her oath of office in 2004. Think about that. I mean, it's just 2004, not very long ago. She was a young district attorney, and now she's vice president, soon to be.
Decides to endorse a presidential candidate named Barack Obama, too, at a point. Right, that's right, not the most popular thing for an ambitious Democrat to be doing.
Yes, well, that certainly is true. But San Francisco is really, especially at that time, it's real hand-to-hand politics. A lot of elbows get thrown. One of the characters in her early career was none other than Kimberly Guilfoyle, Donald Trump Jr.'s significant other. She was a deputy district attorney in San Francisco at the time. And Kimberly Guilfoyle threw an elbow toward Kamala Harris as Kamala Harris was running for district attorney. So it's a very tough place, and the politicians who come out of San Francisco are really extraordinary, and they're very different from the LA politicians. Covering Sacramento for all these years, it's just striking how different they are. San Francisco politicians are very much part of. They're very adept at media relations. They're very adept at dealing with brickbats that get thrown their way. And you think about it, California, San Francisco has produced Nancy Pelosi, Dianne Feinstein, Barbara Boxer before Kamala Harris, Willie Brown, I mean, really Gavin Newsom. I could go on, but really the dominant politicians of our time in California all come out of San Francisco. Alex Padilla, Kamala Harris's replacement as a U.S. Senator, is an exception. He's from LA, but really it's a San Francisco dominated group. So I see that Karen has dropped off, so she may be having some technical difficulties. I do see some questions here, and I assume that I'm still on. Oh, there you are, Karen. You're back. Well, let me.
Okay. So I think I'm back here.
You are back. I see you.
Yes. And can you hear me?
I can hear you fine.
Okay, great. I apologize. I somehow lost that. So now we're on my iPhone. So
okay.
Many apologies. So, so the other meaning of Kamala's way is sort of her way of doing business. And I think the central tension in the book is sort of between her ambition and her impatience and her boldness on the one hand, and in other ways, her caution. I think you see a lot of that, especially when she's district attorney. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. Well, as a politician, she has been pretty bold. She ran for district attorney in 2003 with no name ID. She took on an incumbent who was widely known. His name was widely known in San Francisco, Hallinan, famous name in the city of San Francisco. So she took him on. She ran for California Attorney General against a far more established district attorney in Los Angeles, Steve Cooley, 3 terms, more experienced than her. She knocked him off. So when she, as district attorney, when she was, when a young U.S. senator named Barack Obama was running for president, she was early in his corner. Their relationship goes back to his time as a state senator from the south side of Chicago. But at any rate, she endorsed him early. It was a risky position to take because California was Hillary Clinton territory in 2007 and 8. Almost all the named politicians endorsed then Senator Clinton, or Secretary of State Clinton, and not Obama, but there was Kamala Harris trudging through the miserable cold. I think you were probably there in Iowa in December 2007 and early January 2008, knocking on doors for Barack Obama. She was all in for him. That paid off ultimately. It's part of the way she got to where she is. And he helped her when she ran for Attorney General. It's so interesting, that race, 2010 race for Attorney General, which I was paying a lot of attention to as a columnist for the Sacramento Bee. The Republicans really did see her coming. They thought that she would be, if she won that race, that she would be formidable, that she would be around. As everybody knows, the initials for Attorney General or aspiring governor, AG. They assumed she was going to run for governor or U.S. senator. And so they tried really hard to knock her off, to block her path. Spent in excess of $1 million to help her opponent and block her. Didn't work. And look where she is. They were right.
Well, could you talk about some of her policy choices
Sure.
too? As you know, as San Francisco DA and especially, later as Attorney General.
Yeah. Well, she has been adamantly opposed to capital punishment. She ran on that. It was part of her platform when she ran for San Francisco District Attorney. She was not going to seek the death penalty, no matter the crime. She took the oath of office in January of 2004, and in April there was a terrible murder of a police officer, Isaac Espinosa. Fellow walking down the street opened up with a semi-automatic rifle and killed him. By all accounts, Officer Espinosa was a great cop, fine, upstanding cop. She refused to seek the death penalty, and there was an incredible backlash. None other than Dianne Feinstein, the senior senator from California, spoke at Officer Espinosa's funeral. Kamala Harris was sitting at the front, and Senator Feinstein basically said that this was a death penalty case, that the death penalty ought to be sought. Officers in the audience, and they were there from all over California, stood and cheered. Imagine what must have been going through Kamala Harris's mind as they were cheering. Sure enough, she runs for California Attorney General. She's still opposed to the death penalty, but she promises that should she win, she will enforce the law. And so when the opportunity arose, she actually did that. So there were 3 ballot measures when she was California Attorney General: 2 to abolish the death penalty, and 1 to speed it up. She didn't take positions on any of the 3. One might argue that voters would have benefited from the wisdom of the state's top cop, as they're called out here, but she didn't. She didn't take stance. Her argument was that her deputies had to argue death penalty cases in the state, before the state Supreme Court and the federal courts, and that if she took a position, it would undermine their arguments. So she ducked it.
So the other thing is that, from the minute she takes the oath tomorrow, she is going to be seen as a president in waiting. So what should people be expecting?
Well, Karen, I think you and your colleagues at the Post have a better sense of how she functions in Washington, how she will function as vice president. I try to understand California politics. That said, she's really a smart and accomplished and very deft politician. She understands that her success in the future depends on President Biden's success. I'm just going to be shocked if you or your colleagues at the Post or any other publication there see daylight between her public positions and President Biden's positions. I think that there may be disagreements. There may be disagreements, but those are going to be behind closed doors. I think she's going to be the best vice president she can be, and that's going to mean being his best, most loyal advisor, and that means speaking her mind. You don't bring Kamala Harris onto the ticket to be a potted plant that you shove off into a corner. She's a formidable person. She's got opinions. She's really smart, and I think President Biden's going to use that and come to rely on it.
Well, another issue, though, is that she is going to be in a situation of presiding over a 50-50 Senate. Breaking ties is not a gift. Not that those will not be easy questions that she will confront. I remember Al Gore breaking ties on things like guns that really came back to haunt him in his presidential campaign. I mean, how do you see her handling that?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think, first of all, it makes her, by the fact that she is the 51st vote, even more consequential than she would have otherwise been. I think it's going to matter on judicial appointees, and certainly if there's a fight over confirmation for one of President Biden's cabinet secretaries, it will matter. On something like gun control, there are certain core issues that Kamala Harris has, and I'm just going to be shocked if she bends on things like gun control. I think she is very strong on gun safety and keeping guns out of the hands of people who should not have guns, criminals, for example. I think she's going to be tough on that. They'll try to limit her, the instances where it's a 50-50 vote, but if it's a 50-50 vote, she'll be there. I think it helps. I think that she could well help shape legislation in direct ways, to the extent she has relationships in the Senate that could help as well. It's going to be, I suspect that she will be an even more consequential vice president in a 50-50 Senate. And it will be not a frequently used vote.
So I am having I'm having issues here because my internet has completely gone down at home. So I am doing all this on my cell phone, and as a result, I cannot see the questions coming in. So Dan, I may have to, I think we're about ready to go to questions. And the problem here is going to be that you're going to have to be the one to figure them out. Although I do see one in the chat, which is about her prosecutorial record, which came up over and over again especially during her Democratic primary campaign. So could you talk a little bit, is this an asset to her, or is it a liability in the politics of the, America in 2021?
Well, I think that being a prosecutor is not a bad thing. I think that she has prosecuted cases that resulted in very long sentences for people who committed, really terrible crimes. I don't think people think that's necessarily a terrible idea. Now, from the left, you're right. She absolutely did take hits on that. That she was, Coppola as opposed to Kamala. That she could have taken positions, and certainly she could have. There were, I talked about the death penalty initiatives, which she didn't take stands on. There are other issues that she could have taken stands on, and ones that she did. Truancy, for example. Truancy. If you're a parent of a habitually truant elementary school student, that's a crime under California law, and that's a statute that she advocated for, pushed for. Sponsored that legislation. It's a big deal. It was a big deal at the time. Nobody goes to jail for it, but it's on the books. So yeah, she took no small amount of heat for her positions as a prosecutor. That said, I don't think people like being victims of crime, and I do believe that in a general election. Well, I certainly know that her campaign people thought that in a general election, the fact that she had been a prosecutor would be useful, and and she also speaks about she'll as America deals with the aftermath of George Floyd and clearly racial injustice in the criminal justice system. She'll speak on that issue from basis of true knowledge. I mean, she spent a lot of years as a deputy district attorney prosecuting everything from DUI to, sex trafficking. So she's, she understands how the system works and maybe understands better than most how it ought to work.
So we have another great question here, which is, could you compare her treatment in the media and on the campaign with that of Hillary Clinton 4 years ago? I mean, they were both path breakers, women aspiring to offices that women had never held before. What do you think Senator Harris, soon to be Vice President Harris, learned from watching what Hillary Clinton went through? And, where was the country on the question of a woman in high office 4 years later?
Well, I think you're probably much better positioned to answer that than I am. You were on the campaign trail. I wasn't. I was in California. But the Democratic Party nominated Joe Biden. It did not nominate Elizabeth Warren or Kirsten Gillibrand or Kamala Harris. I think there was a feeling that Joe Biden was the person who could beat Donald Trump, and that was the imperative. Now, when she was deciding whether to run, Kamala Harris understood that the odds were long. There have only been 46 presidents, and to get the nomination is no small feat. And Hillary Clinton got the nomination and then fell short. So she knew that the odds were going to be long. She also thought, though, that she would have been well positioned to have beaten Donald Trump. I don't know that that's true, but that was her view. She would not have run if she didn't think that she could beat Donald Trump. Voters had a different view. So I don't know. You tell me. What do you think? Do you think?
Well, actually,
ready for this?
As brutal as the media culture was for Hillary Clinton, and I'm talking about not just the mass media, but social media. Mm-hmm. The sort of sophistication and the ability of people to spread false information, to spread sexist and racist memes, it's just extraordinary these days. And at one point I did a piece for the Post where I tracked something that began as one guy's kind of ramblings on Facebook that ultimately grows into this blog post that is not only false and not what he even wrote originally, but it is shared hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of times. It's
right. That was a great piece. Great piece about a guy named Steve Baldwin, who I knew out here, and as a state assemblyman, a backbench state assemblyman. And you're right. It's extraordinary. And I see it now in my Twitter feed. I mean, I'm not all that active on Twitter, but I get all these really racist and sexist comments that I've written a book about Kamala Harris. It's just you wonder where people come up with this stuff and really what their mothers or daughters would think of them if they knew.
Yeah, I just don't know what the way out of this is. Again, because you just look at the sorts of things that can kind of catch fire in these sort of dark, weird corners of the internet. And she was just really hit with so much of that. I mean, and what do you think of sort of how she handled it and what in her coming of age in California and specifically in California politics, did that prepare her for any of this?
Well, she became a target of really serious trolls when she was in the U.S. Senate early in her tenure in the U.S. Senate. They really went after her in a significant way. The thing I found about Kamala Harris is, as Attorney General, I was not particularly well. I feel like I was fairly tough. We didn't endorse her. We endorsed her opponent. She was not a thin-skinned politician. You could write something about her that clearly she didn't like or wouldn't like, and she'd still talk to you. She might make an offhand comment, but she understands the give and take. I think she understands the weird media culture that we're in, and I don't think she's well. I think I don't think she has a thin skin. I do think that she is. She understands new media in ways that perhaps older generation politicians don't. And also coming from California, I mean, she knows that this is where so much of it begins, Facebook, Twitter, etc. So she does understand it. I'll be so interested to see how the Biden administration and the new Congress deal with the Communications Decency Act and some of these laws that maybe need to be tuned up a bit.
So she starts out in that very first debate. She lands a punch on Joe Biden on busing. I mean, it's probably the toughest hit he took in any of the debates, which was the reason that some people were saying there's just no way he could pick her as his running mate. So one of our other questions, what do you think really sealed the deal that put her on the ticket? And then what difference do you think it made in the outcome for Joe Biden to have selected her?
Well, again, I think you're better positioned to understand that. But from what I gather, people don't vote for vice presidents; they vote for presidents, presidential candidates. That said, it was a real gut punch to Joe Biden, without a doubt. It was a very tough hit. She was highly critical of him for taking the side against busing to achieve desegregation and aligning himself with segregationists. So it was quite a brutal hit. That said, she was running to win. And she knew that he was the front runner. And if she was going to win, she had to topple him. Now, it didn't work. Her campaign really never took off. She raised $12 million in that first quarter, which is mediocre. I mean, Barack Obama in his first quarter in 2007 raised $27 million. So it was her campaign just didn't catch fire.
But after a spectacular start, I think that announcement of hers was, one of the kind of most dazzling we've ever seen.
Sure. Well, I mean, she was a serious candidate, absolutely a serious candidate, and if things had broken differently, she might have gotten a nomination. But I think people in South Carolina, she could never dislodge support for Joe Biden in South Carolina, and that was clearly pivotal. Democrats win their nominations, it seems to me, by going through the South, and she just didn't take off there. She could not topple him. That said, to me, it's a very interesting thing. She dropped out in December of 2019. It was smart on her part before the Iowa caucus, and even more importantly, before in plenty of time to keep her name off the California ballot, because she wasn't going to win California. And had she lost California, then she really would have been weakened in a re-election 2 years out. That said, it was an interesting campaign to get her on the ticket. Initially, after she dropped out, she basically went about the business of being a United States senator, introduced a bunch of bills. None of them went anywhere because it was, obviously Mitch McConnell's Senate. There was an effort to campaign on her behalf earlier in the year. She put the kibosh on that. But then later in August, I believe it might have been July of 2020, the Lieutenant Governor of California, Eleni Kounalakis, who was President Obama's ambassador to Hungary, took it upon herself to organize a phone call with Biden's people. Got several influential Democrats from California on that call, former Governor Gray Davis, Stockton Mayor Michael Tubbs, just a bunch of people who were significant California Democrats, Robert Garcia of Long Beach, mayor down there, to get on a call with Biden, get on a call to Wilmington and basically explain that Kamala Harris was a serious person who had a deep well of support in California. And his fundraising clearly jumped once he made that announcement in mid-August. She gave it a jolt of energy. She is my experience in California, watching her campaign out here, is she can be a very good politician, very good on the stump, a good retail politician. I know that the experience of the National Press Corps in New Hampshire and Iowa, maybe you want to talk about that a little bit. She was uneven at best. But I do think that as a vice presidential candidate, from what I could see from afar, she there weren't too many missteps that I'm aware of anyway.
Yeah, I mean, just having covered the campaign, what I think came off in her presidential campaign as being overly cautious, as a running mate, it translated as just being incredibly disciplined. Mm-hmm. So, I don't know which of those things it was, but I mean, she was really a pretty flawless running mate. Mm-hmm. But again, we find ourselves.
You're right. She can be really disciplined. Really disciplined. It's when she doesn't want to answer a question, she's really good at not answering a question. When she wants to answer it, she can be quite eloquent. So.
Well, we keep getting back to, and we have another question here about, Joe Biden is 78 years old. He has not discouraged speculation that he will be a one-term president. I mean, she's essentially on deck for the Democratic nomination. Number one, what does she need to do now, do you think, to sort of fill out the picture of her as a potential commander-in-chief? For instance, she doesn't really have a lot of foreign policy experience. And, what kind of president do you think she would be?
You can never really tell. You're right. She doesn't have huge amounts of foreign policy experience. President-elect Biden does. I think he will bring that level of expertise will be apparent. She'll learn from his lead, I would guess. That said, she made a point of getting on the Intelligence Committee in the Senate. It's not very often that a freshman gets such an assignment. Like I say, she grew up in a multicultural family and life. So she has a worldview. This is not a parochial person. It is the case that she was very slow when she was running for the U.S. Senate to take positions on fundamental issues, Israel, for example, Middle East policy, NATO policy. But I mean, I think you can pretty much expect that she's going to be a big defender of NATO and our relations with Europeans. I just can't imagine that she wouldn't be. So what kind of president would she be? I think the question is she ready to be president? I don't know. Was Bill Clinton ready to be president? Was Barack Obama ready to be president? I think Joe Biden is ready to be president. I don't think Donald Trump was. Hillary Clinton probably would have been. But how many presidents really are ready? It's such a huge job. I mean, I can't imagine.
But when you look though at there are essentially two kinds of vice presidential models. There are the vice presidents who come in with their own portfolios, whether it's Al Gore on the environment and reinventing government, or Dick Cheney essentially running a shadow National Security Council. But Biden and Harris have both said that they'll be following the other model, which is that she's in the room for every decision. She is the last person he talks to before he makes a decision. But I am really wondering, again, she's coming into office at this time of such enormous crisis. I mean, what sorts of role do you see her taking on, for instance, in dealing with COVID? Are there any sort of natural areas of interest where you think she is going to be sort of making her own point of view known?
Well, the daughter of a cancer researcher believes in science. So to the extent that she has portfolio in combating the horrible pandemic we're all living through, she will follow the lead of our great scientists at the CDC and beyond. She is, I would expect that some of the issues that have been so important in California, immigration, has got to be an issue that has to be addressed. There has to be some sort of pathway for Dreamers DACA recipients to have some sort of permanency in their lives, a pathway to citizenship if the Senate can get that through, the House can get that through. I think that immigration is going to be an issue where she would be involved. She went to the Senate promising that she would deal with immigration in a humane way. So I would guess that she would have some role there. And the criminal justice system, I mean, this is, just given her depth of knowledge, she's been in a courtroom. She knows that people do bad things. She knows that the system is unfair to people. So I do believe that if there is a serious effort to overhaul the criminal justice system, that she would be integral to that. She's going to be very supportive of civil rights, of course. She's voting rights. I would guess that there's going to be some sort of legislation related to, in protecting voting rights. Immigration, justice, civil rights, women's reproductive health, that matters to her. These are the core issues. They're popular in California, and she's in sync with Californians on those issues.
Well, I think too, another place to look for her potentially to have an impact, and if you look at including some of the legislation she's sponsored and pushed in the Senate, is on things like equities and things, healthcare, making sure that scientific research is not just sort of centered around white males.
Oh yeah.
that the government resources are distributed in an equitable fashion. I mean, that too seems like a real area where she not only, is the person that you would look to just because of her own background, but also it's a place where she's really shown an interest in the Senate.
Yeah, well, yes, you look at the bills she's introduced. Not that her bills got very far, but the bills that she introduced, I think they're kind of a roadmap. She's very concerned, as should we all be, about inequities and racial inequities in healthcare, and how Black women are just treated differently when they complain of pain in childbirth, and so there are higher mortality, infant mortality, and maternal mortality. So these are, this is the sort of stuff that I think that matter to her, and that she's in the room is going to make clear that those issues have to be addressed. Like I say, you don't put Kamala Harris in as vice president because you want a yes person. That's not who she is. She's got her own views based on everything I observed out here in California. She's not going to be shy. She's gonna speak her mind. She's gonna be heard.
So in the few moments that we have left, I want to go back though to the path breaking of Barack Obama and her relationship with him, and sort of how did this friendship, did this mutual support between the two of them begin, and how important has that relationship been?
Mm-hmm. Well, that all politicians come to California to raise money, and State Senator Barack Obama was no different. He came to California to raise money. He came to the Bay Area to raise money, and she was there for him. She helped him. She helped organize events. She called on her donors to give him a hand. It was, from what I gather, people were quite enthusiastic about State Senator Barack Obama and then U.S. Senator Barack Obama. But she was there at the beginning, and then he was there in return. Now, I've never spoken to Barack Obama. I don't know fundamental details about that relationship. It's not as if she was a constant presence in the White House when he was president, but there is a relationship there. And when she was running for California Attorney General, a Republican committee, Super PAC, had spent in excess of $1 million to knock her off. President Barack Obama came out, held a fundraiser for her, did an event down in Los Angeles, a rally, called her his dear, dear friend. That mattered. She did not win by very many votes. In fact, on election night, her opponent, Steve Cooley, declared that he had won. He even passed out pins saying Cooley is Attorney General. So it was a very close race, and President Obama helped her. It's not as if in 2010 he was running around helping a lot of Democrats. That was a pretty tough year for Democrats running down ticket, running for House and Senate seats, as you may recall. So, but he carved out time for her. So yeah, that relationship matters. I have no idea whether what impact he had on her decision to run for president, or what impact President Obama had on Joe Biden's decision to select her. I would guess that if he had been asked, he would have said kind things. I know that she spoke with him before she ran, but then I guess he spoke to many Democrats who were running for president back then. So.
Well, I think we are just about out of getting back down to our final questions here. So let's take it back to the beginning. Another thing that I'm really struck by, I mean, today, when Joe Biden was leaving Wilmington, you really got the sense that he's got a real aching in his heart over the fact that his son, Beau, who, by the way, was a friend of Kamala Harris, won't be there. Do you think she has sort of that same sense about her mother, who was just such a force in her life to, you know, not be there to witness this incredible moment that we are about to see?
You know, she always talks about her mom. And then in these public settings, in these momentous settings, and she's had several since her mom died in 2009. Yeah, she goes out of her way to, I don't know if she goes out of her way, but she makes, but she talks in very affectionate terms, admiring terms of her mom. And it's, you know, it's touching, it's moving, I think. They clearly had an incredible bond, Kamala Harris and her sister Maya Harris, with their mother. So yeah, absolutely. I think that matters. And it is certainly the case that Kamala Harris's relationship with Beau Biden, which was formed when she was California Attorney General and he was Delaware Attorney General, had an impact on Joe Biden. He's talked about it multiple times. He came out here in 2016 when she was running for U.S. Senate and gave a really very touching speech to the Democratic state convention. But he opened that speech by recalling that Beau Biden, who had died the year prior, was close to Kamala Harris and how that really mattered to him. So and he's talked about that since. So I do think that Beau Biden's influence, Beau Biden had a say in President-elect Biden's decision to pick Kamala Harris as his running mate.
Well, I'm afraid we are just about out of time here. But before we go, I do want to apologize for my internet here in my house picking a really terrible moment to go out. So I'm sitting here on my cell phone. But Dan, congratulations on such a terrific and timely book. It really is like the guide to Kamala Harris that I think we all will benefit so much from at this particular moment.
Well, thanks so much, and of course I relied on some of your great reporting and putting it together. You helped inform me and so many others. So thank you so much, Karen.
Thank you.
Yeah, Karen, great moderating, and don't worry, we saw you and heard you very, very well. And Dan, you've got exquisite timing, and have done a real service to everyone, coming out so quickly with the biography of the new vice president and drawing on your own experiences reporting on her and California politics over the years. To everyone watching, thanks again for tuning in. Remember, you can find a link in the chat column to purchase Dan's book, Kamala's Way. From all of us here at Politics and Prose, stay well and well read.